Due to the Patriot Act, the very device that you're viewing this message on can and has been used against you. Ever since 9/11, we have continued to lose freedom and the hope of holding on to personal autonomy. In the not-so-distant future, a film like Minority Report can go from scientific fiction to science fact. The technology to record our every single movement exists today. And as you can see by this graph provided by the ACLU, this is the amount of people affected by mass surveillance since the passing of the Patriot Act. And new technologies like facial recognition can track the face, file it away with precision for later use. And this is a threat to us all, and the United States government is actively pursuing ways to acquire this technology from Google. Fortunately, however, there is still time to challenge this broken system, but we have to understand the danger of allowing an unchecked government the absolute power of the NSA. If we're ever going to defend our privacy and the ability to fight for civil rights. The first reason to be concerned about mass surveillance and to be terrified about data collection is because of the government wielding this power has a long history of abusing that power for political purposes. We need to go back to think about this, to go back to the 1950s and 60s during the civil rights era when the FBI was using primitive wiretapping surveillance technologies of the time to spy on protesters of the civil rights movement who were trying to pass the Voting Rights Act. J. Edgar Hoover would spy on Martin Luther King to acquire information to find out if he was a crook or a communist. He was neither, but instead he used that personal information that he went through to smear him in the presses, which was not only abuse of the FBI then, they have continued to do things like this since. And it doesn't need to be corrupt or malice for something to go horribly wrong and for someone's life to be ruined. As you can see from this picture, this is Stephen Talley, and this is a bank robber. They are not the same person, but because of an error in the Minority Report-like software, he lost his home because he was arrested because of a bank robbery he did not commit. He lost his home, he lost custody to his kids, and he lost his job. And these are the sort of things that should have been considered before implementing a mass surveillance data collection apparatus. But instead, the Bush administration was too busy wondering if they could, how could they spy on us, rather than if they should spy on us. And this brings me to the second reason why we should be concerned about mass surveillance, is that in America, we are raised to believe that we are free and that our rights are protected. But because of the Constitution being written centuries ago, and the things that protect our rights, like the Constitution, say the First Amendment protects our freedom of speech, and the Fifth Amendment protects our right to remain silent. These things were written in a time where something like this, the NSA, and their ability to go through your stuff digitally, could not have been imagined by people like Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson. That is why, when they wrote the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson wrote to James Madison, a fellow founding father, that every constitution and every law expires, or at least should expire, at the end of 19 years. Because if a law is written for 19 years and it is still enforced 19 years later, it is no longer a right, but it instead is it is forced upon a new generation. Laws should be written by the generation that is to be followed by. They should not be ruled by previous generations. That is why we have amendments, and that is why things like slavery or the right to vote have been amended in the Constitution, because these things were not originally set up a part of that. So that is what we need to do. And the fact that the 14th Amendment is so outdated, that is why we should be concerned, because we are not protected from digital invasions of our privacy. And for further clarity into why it is so concerning that we don't have like a more recent update, is because the last meaningful update that set precedent for this was over 50 years ago with Katz versus the United States. It was a court case that set the parameters of what reasonable meant when searching someone and what made it unlawful. The problem is even though that updated it in the 1950s compared to when the Constitution was written, it is still over 50 years out of date, and we need something that updates that. And even this court case mentioned that there needs to be a time when a new court case sets a new precedent. Yet, ever since the Patriot Act, there has not been a meaningful court case that has radically set the precedent for today's world, the world in which all of this is happening in. Which brings me to my conclusion. What is the meaningful goal for policy that we can strive towards to protect ourselves, our privacy, and our ability to fight for our civil rights? We have seen brave men and women like Edward Snowden when he leaked and he released all the information about how the U.S. government was illegally bulk collecting all of our phone records without reason. We have all been unreasonably searched because of this. And then, and more recently than that, this past year, brave men and women, lawyers and legal advocates have won cases and investigations concerning the legality of what the government did. But it's more important than just showing what the government's doing is illegal. We need to amend the Constitution. We need to have these court cases set precedent so we are protected in the future. And there are things we can do as individuals, like you can voting is very important. You can vote for politicians who will not further agendas for privacy invasions. If they vote to pass a new Patriot Act extension, they're not good to vote for. And we can also support companies with our money. Like we can buy things from Google, because Google is a company that is refusing to give that facial recognition software to the government, which is also helping us. Another thing is a company like Apple. They have stood firmly against giving Apple the ability to access the phone of suspects in custody. There is time for us to change course. There's time for us to protect the future generations. And it is important for us to advocate for a better future and change our fate.